If marriage is a contract, I miss the asterisk about the fine print. That thought hit me as I watched my wife Valerie apply her third coat of lipstick at our kitchen counter, her reflection multiplied in the chrome surface of our coffee maker like some twisted kaleidoscope of deception. "Working late again?" I asked, stirring my coffee with deliberate slowness. The spoon clinked against the ceramic mug, a wedding gift from her mother, ironically enough. "Unfortunately, yes." Valerie didn't look up from her compact mirror. The quarterly reports won't finish themselves, and Brad wants everything perfect for the board meeting. Brad. Always Brad these days. Bradford Shearing, her boss at Morrison Packaging Solutions, where Valerie worked as operations executive. 48 years old, silver-haired, married to money, and apparently the most demanding supervisor in corporate America based on how often his name came up in our conversations. "Third time this week," I observed, taking a sip. The coffee tasted bitter, but then again, everything did lately. She snapped the compact shut with a sharp click. "Eric, you know how important this promotion is. Regional director doesn't just fall into your lap." Eric. She used to call me Rick. Everyone called me Rick, except when I was in trouble with my mother as a kid, or apparently when my wife was lying through her perfectly whitened teeth. Right, the promotion. I nodded, watching her gather her things. Designer purse, leather portfolio, the good perfume she'd been saving for special occasions. Apparently, over time, qualified as special now. She kissed my cheek. A quick, perfunctory peck that barely registered. "Don't wait up. This could go until midnight." The front door closed with its familiar thud, leaving me alone with the lingering scent of her perfume and a growing certainty that something was fundamentally wrong with this picture. I'd been married to Valerie for 8 years, together for 10. I knew her tells, her habits, her rhythms. This wasn't work stress. This was something else entirely. I'm Rick Mason, 39 years old, project manager at Midwest Logistics Hub. Not the most glamorous job, but it pays the bills and keeps our modest 2-bedroom house in Riverside Heights running smoothly. I coordinate shipments, manage schedules, solve problems that other people create. I'm good at noticing details, connecting dots, seeing patterns where others see chaos. And right now, every pattern was pointing toward one unavoidable conclusion. The wine bottle on our counter told the first part of the story. Valerie's favorite, a $40 Pinot Grigio she'd bought 3 days ago, claiming she wanted to celebrate landing a new client. The bottle sat unopened, gathering dust, while she worked her mysterious late nights. Strange behavior for someone who usually opened wine the moment she walked through the door after any kind of victory. I picked up her coffee mug from this morning, the one she'd barely touched. Lipstick stained the rim, but not the shade she'd been wearing at breakfast. This was deeper, more dramatic. Evening colors, not daytime professional. My phone buzzed. Text message from Pete, my best friend and owner of Murphy's Tavern downtown. "Poker tonight? Jimmy's buying the first round." I stared at the message, then at the empty house around me. Our home, which Valerie and I had renovated together 3 years ago. We'd painted these walls, installed the hardwood floors, picked out every piece of furniture together. Now it felt like a museum of better times, preserved but no longer lived in. "Can't make it," I texted back. "Got some detective work to do." Pete responded immediately. "Everything okay?" "Define okay." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally. "Want to talk about it?" "Not yet. Still gathering evidence." "Evidence of what?" I set the phone down without answering. Some conversations required more than text messages, and some suspicions needed proof before they became accusations. The house felt different when Valerie wasn't here. Quieter, but also more honest somehow. Without her presence filling the space with chatter about clients and meetings and Brad's latest demands, I could think clearly. And thinking clearly led me to some uncomfortable realizations. The late nights had started 6 weeks ago. Always on Wednesdays and Fridays, sometimes Tuesdays. Never weekends, never Mondays. A pattern that suggested planning rather than spontaneous overtime. Her phone habits had changed too. She used to leave it lying around, face up, notifications visible. Now it stayed face down, always within arm's reach. Protected by a passcode she'd never bothered with before. When I'd asked about it, she'd claimed the company required enhanced security for executives. Plausible, but convenient. Then there were the clothes. Valerie had always dressed professionally, but lately her work wardrobe had taken on a different quality. More fitted jackets, shorter skirts, the kind of outfits that suggested she was dressing for an audience of one rather than a boardroom full of colleagues. I walked upstairs to our bedroom and opened her closet. Everything organized by color and season, just like always. But pushed to the back, behind her winter coats, I found something new, a garment bag I didn't recognize. Inside, a black dress I'd never seen before. Expensive, elegant, definitely not office appropriate. The tags were still attached, purchased 2 weeks ago at a boutique downtown. My hands shook slightly as I zipped the bag closed and returned it to its hiding place. The evidence was circumstantial, but mounting. My wife was having an affair, and she wasn't even being particularly careful about hiding it. The question was, what was I going to do about it? I could confront her directly, demand the truth, force a conversation that would inevitably end in tears, denials, and probably divorce papers. The mature, adult approach that marriage counselors recommended. Or I could do what I do best, gather information, analyze the situation, and plan my response accordingly. I chose option 2. Back downstairs, I opened my laptop and started researching Morrison Packaging Solutions. Their website showed a typical corporate structure, executive team, board of directors, company values that nobody actually followed. Bradford Shearing's photo smiled back at me from the leadership page. Distinguished silver hair, expensive suit, the kind of confident smile that suggested he was used to getting what he wanted. And before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Married to Patricia Shearing, according to the social pages, 2 grown children, house in the expensive part of town, member of the country club. A pillar of the community who apparently had time for extracurricular activities with his employees. My phone rang, startling me from my research. Valerie's name appeared on the screen. "Hi, honey," I answered, keeping my voice neutral. "Just wanted to let you know we're ordering dinner to the office. This is going to be a long night." Background noise suggested she was somewhere public. Restaurant sounds, conversation, clinking glasses, not the quiet hum of an office building after hours. "Sounds rough," I said. "What kind of dinner?" A pause. "Italian, I think. Brad's assistant is handling it." "Well, don't work too hard. I love you." "Love you too. See you in the morning." The line went quiet. I sat staring at my phone, processing the conversation. She'd called to establish her alibi, but the background noise had given her away. Unless Morrison Packaging had installed a full restaurant in their conference room, Valerie was somewhere else entirely. I made a decision that would change everything. Grabbing my keys and jacket, I headed for the door. If my wife wanted to work late, maybe I'd surprise her with a visit, bring her some coffee, see how the quarterly reports were coming along, show up unannounced at her office and find out exactly what kind of overtime she was putting in. The drive to Morrison Packaging took 20 minutes through evening traffic. Their building sat in the business district downtown, a gleaming glass tower that housed a dozen different companies. I'd been there twice before for company parties, so I knew the layout. Valerie's office was on the 15th floor, corner suite with windows facing the river. I parked across the street and looked up at the building. Most of the windows were dark, which made sense for 7:30 on a Wednesday evening, but the 15th floor showed several lit offices, including what looked like Valerie's corner. The security guard in the lobby recognized me from previous visits. "Evening, Mr. Mason? Here to see your wife?" "Thought I'd bring her some coffee. She's working late again." He nodded sympathetically. "They've been putting in long hours up there. Elevator bank B will take you right up." The elevator ride felt endless. Each floor that passed brought me closer to a truth I wasn't sure I wanted to face. But suspicion had become certainty, and certainty demanded action. The 15th floor was mostly dark, illuminated only by emergency lighting and the glow from a few occupied offices. I could hear voices coming from the direction of Valerie's office, her laugh, unmistakable and genuine, in a way I hadn't heard in months. I walked quietly down the carpeted hallway, my footsteps muffled by the thick pile. As I got closer, the voices became clearer. Valerie's voice, and a man's, deep, confident, amused. "We should probably get back to those reports," the man said. Brad's voice, I realized. I'd heard it at company functions. "Probably," Valerie agreed, but her tone suggested she had no intention of returning to work. I reached her office door, which stood slightly ajar. Through the gap, I could see part of her desk, papers scattered across the surface. And I could see Valerie sitting on the edge of the desk, her jacket removed, her hair loose from its usual professional style. Brad stood in front of her, his hands on her waist, his face inches from hers. "Patricia's at her book club until 10, he said quietly, "and Eric thinks I'm working late." Valerie's voice held a note of satisfaction, as if she enjoyed the deception. "Then we have time." He kissed her, and she responded with an enthusiasm I hadn't seen from her in years. Her arms went around his neck, pulling him closer, and any remaining doubt I might have harbored evaporated completely. I stood frozen in the hallway, watching my marriage dissolve in real time. 8 years of shared history, reduced to a clandestine office encounter between quarterly reports and performance reviews. The smart thing would have been to leave quietly, process what I'd seen, plan my next move carefully. But intelligence and emotion don't always align, and I found myself pushing the door open wider. They broke apart at the sound, Valerie's eyes going wide with shock and something that might have been fear. Brad stepped back, straightening his tie with practiced casualness, as if he'd been caught in compromising positions before. "Eric." Valerie's voice came out as barely a whisper. "I can explain." "I'm sure you can." My own voice sounded strange to my ears, calm, almost conversational. "Don't let me interrupt your quarterly reports." I turned and walked away, leaving them to whatever explanation they wanted to construct. The elevator ride down felt quicker than the ride up, and the security guard didn't look up from his newspaper as I passed through the lobby. Back in my car, I sat for several minutes, processing what had just happened. The confirmation of my suspicions should have felt like victory, but instead, it felt like the end of everything I'd thought I knew about my life. My phone buzzed. Text from Valerie. "Please come back. We need to talk." I deleted the message without responding. Another buzz. "It's not what you think." I turned off the phone entirely. The drive home passed in a blur of streetlights and traffic signals. Our house looked the same as always, neat lawn, painted shutters, the porch light I'd installed last summer. But everything had changed in the space of an hour, and there was no going back to the comfortable ignorance I'd been living in. Inside, I poured myself 3 fingers of whiskey and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the wine bottle Valerie had never opened. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd bought it to celebrate landing a new client, but the only thing she'd landed was her boss. My phone, when I finally turned it back on, showed 17 missed calls and 12 text messages, all from Valerie, progressing from explanations to apologies to increasingly desperate pleas for conversation. I read them all, then deleted everyone. The house felt different now, not like a home, but like a crime scene. Evidence of our shared life surrounded me, wedding photos on the mantel, vacation souvenirs on the bookshelf, the coffee maker that had reflected her lies this morning. I finished my whiskey and made a decision that would define everything that came next. If Valerie wanted to play games, I'd show her what a real player looked like. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and a pot of coffee, planning my next moves with the same methodical approach I used for logistics problems at work. The difference was that this time, the cargo I was moving was my wife's life, and the destination was complete destruction. By sunrise, I had a plan. First priority, financial lockdown. Our joint accounts, credit cards, and shared assets needed immediate attention. Valerie had always been content to let me handle the money management, claiming she was too busy with work to bother with mundane things like budgets and bank statements. That oversight was about to become her biggest mistake. I started with our primary checking account. Online banking made it simple. I transferred everything except $100 to my personal account, the one Valerie didn't even know existed. 8 years of marriage had taught me the value of having emergency funds that only I could access. Next, the credit cards. I called each company and reported the cards as lost, requesting immediate cancellation and new cards sent to a P.O. box I'd rented 6 months ago during a brief paranoid phase about identity theft, paranoia that now seemed remarkably prescient. The house presented a more complex challenge. We owned it jointly, but I'd been the one making the mortgage payments from our joint account, the account I'd just emptied. Changing the locks would be illegal without her consent, but there were other ways to make someone feel unwelcome in their own home. By 7 a.m., I was at Home Depot, purchasing a security system that would make Fort Knox jealous. Motion sensors, cameras, door alarms, window sensors, everything I'd need to monitor who came and went from our property. The teenage clerk who rang up my purchase looked impressed. "Big house?" he asked, scanning the barcode on my 5th motion detector. "Getting bigger every day," I replied. Back home, I installed the system with the efficiency of someone who'd spent years coordinating complex logistics operations. Cameras covered every entrance. Motion sensors monitored the main living areas, and door alarms would alert me to any unauthorized entry attempts. I programmed everything to send notifications to my phone and upload footage to a cloud storage account Valerie couldn't access. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was turning our home into a fortress to protect myself from my own wife. My phone rang at 9:15. Valerie's name appeared on the screen, but I let it go to voicemail. She called again at 9:20, 9:25, and 9:30. Each call went unanswered. Finally, she tried a different approach. A text message. "Eric, please answer your phone. I know you're upset, but we can work this out." I responded immediately. Nothing to work out. Saw everything I needed to see. It was a mistake. It didn't mean anything. Looked pretty meaningful from where I stood. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, "Can I come home? We need to talk face to face." Home is wherever you and Brad want to have your next quarterly review. The dots appeared and disappeared several more times, but no response came. I spent the rest of the morning researching Morrison Packaging Solutions more thoroughly. Public companies leave extensive paper trails, and Brad Shearing had left quite a trail indeed. SEC filings, executive compensation reports, board meeting minutes, all publicly available for anyone curious enough to look. What I found was illuminating. Brad had been with Morrison for 12 years, working his way up from regional manager to his current position as senior vice president of operations. His salary was a matter of public record, $350,000 a year, plus bonuses and stock options that pushed his total compensation well into 6 figures. More interesting were the reports of his previous relationships within the company. A harassment complaint filed 3 years ago by a marketing coordinator, settled out of court with a non-disclosure agreement. Another complaint from an executive assistant 2 years ago, also settled quietly. The pattern suggested that Brad made a habit of mixing business with pleasure, and that Morrison's legal department had gotten very good at making problems disappear. Valerie was just the latest in a series of office conquests, which somehow made the betrayal both more predictable and more insulting. My research was interrupted by the doorbell. Through the security camera I'd installed that morning, I could see a familiar figure on my front porch. Pete Kowalski, owner of Murphy's Tavern and my best friend since college. "Thought you might need some company," he said when I opened the door. Pete was built like the linebacker he'd been in college, 6'2", broad shoulders, hands like baseball mitts. But his expression was gentle, concerned in the way that only true friends manage. "How did you know?" "Lucky guess. Plus, you sent some cryptic texts last night about detective work and didn't show up for poker. When Pete Kowalski's radar goes off, Pete Kowalski investigates." I let him in, grateful for the company despite my preference for solitude. Pete had a way of cutting through complications and getting to the heart of problems, a skill that had served him well in the bar business. "So," he said, settling into my kitchen chair like he owned the place, "what kind of detective work are we talking about?" I told him everything. The suspicious behavior, the late nights, the office visit, the scene I'd witnessed. Pete listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each detail. "That cheating witch," he said when I finished. 8 years of marriage, and she throws it away for some corporate suit. "It gets worse," I said, showing him the research I'd compiled on Brad. "This isn't his first rodeo. Guy's got a pattern of fooling around with employees." Pete studied the documents with the intensity of someone reading a restaurant inspection report. "So what's the plan? Please tell me there's a plan." "Oh, there's definitely a plan." I outlined my strategy: financial pressure, social embarrassment, professional consequences, and personal humiliation. Not necessarily in that order, and definitely not stopping until both Valerie and Brad understood the cost of their betrayal. "Sounds like war," Pete observed. "It is war. They just don't know it yet." My phone buzzed with another text from Valerie. "Eric, I tried to use my credit card for lunch, and it was declined. What's going on?" I showed the message to Pete, who grinned with genuine appreciation. "You work fast." 8 years in logistics teaches you efficiency. I typed back, "Technical difficulties. Try asking Brad to buy lunch." Her response came immediately. "This isn't funny. I need access to our accounts." So did I. Funny how that works. The phone rang. Valerie calling again. I declined the call and turned to Pete. "Want to help me with Phase 2? "Depends. How illegal are we talking?" "Completely legal, just creative." Pete's grin widened. "I'm in." Phase 2 required a trip to Morrison Packaging Solutions, but this time I wasn't going as a concerned husband bringing coffee to his hard-working wife. This time, I was going as a concerned citizen with information that Morrison's Human Resources Department might find interesting. The security camera footage from their office building was probably protected, but the parking garage was a different story. Most corporate parking facilities use third-party security companies with less stringent data protection policies. A little research revealed that Morrison's garage was managed by Secure Space Solutions, a company that had recently been in the news for a data breach that exposed customer information. "So, we're going to hack into their security system?" Pete asked as we drove downtown. "We're going to walk into their office and ask nicely for information about unauthorized after-hours access to the Morrison building," I corrected. "Sometimes the direct approach works better than espionage." Secure Space Solutions occupied a cramped office above a sandwich shop, staffed by 2 bored-looking security guards and a receptionist who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. "We're investigating some suspicious activity in the Morrison building," I told the receptionist, flashing my work ID quickly enough that she couldn't read the company name. "Possible unauthorized access during evening hours. We'd like to review your parking records for the past 6 weeks." The magic words were possible unauthorized access. Security companies lived in fear of liability issues, and the suggestion that their systems might have been compromised sent the receptionist into helpful overdrive. "Of course, sir. Let me get our manager." The manager, a thin man in his 50s named Gary, was equally eager to cooperate. Within 15 minutes, we had printouts of every vehicle that had accessed the Morrison parking garage during evening hours over the past 6 weeks. "Hope this helps with your investigation," Gary said as we left. "Oh, it definitely will," I assured him. Back in my car, Pete and I reviewed the parking records. The pattern was immediately obvious. Brad's BMW and Valerie's Honda appeared together in the garage every Wednesday and Friday evening for the past 6 weeks, usually arriving within minutes of each other and leaving around the same time. "They're not even trying to be subtle," Pete observed. "Arrogance," I said. "They think they're smarter than everyone else." Big mistake. The biggest. That evening, I compiled everything into a comprehensive dossier. Parking records, timeline of their meetings, background information on Brad's previous relationships within the company, and a detailed summary of Morrison's policies regarding workplace relationships and conflicts of interest. The company handbook, available on their website, was very clear about relationships between supervisors and subordinates. Such relationships had to be disclosed to human resources immediately, and failure to do so was grounds for immediate termination. I packaged everything in a professional-looking folder and addressed it to Jennifer Walsh, Morrison's Director of Human Resources. No return address, no identifying information, just the facts laid out in chronological order with supporting documentation. The cover letter was brief and to the point. "Dear Ms. Walsh, please find enclosed documentation of an undisclosed relationship between Senior VP Bradford Shearing and Operations Executive Valerie Mason. As you'll see from the attached records, this relationship has been ongoing for approximately 6 weeks and appears to violate company policy regarding supervisor-subordinate relationships. I trust you'll handle this matter with appropriate discretion. Sincerely, a concerned employee." I mailed the package that night, using a post office box across town to avoid any potential tracing. By morning, Jennifer Walsh would have everything she needed to launch an investigation that would turn both Valerie's and Brad's professional lives upside down. But that was just the beginning. Phase 3 would require more creativity, more patience, and significantly more public humiliation, because destroying someone's career was satisfying, but destroying their reputation was an art form, and I was just getting started. My phone buzzed with another message from Valerie. "Eric, please call me. I'm staying at a hotel tonight, but we need to talk about this situation." I typed back, "The situation is very clear. You chose Brad over 8 years of marriage. Live with the consequences. It's not that simple. Actually, it is exactly that simple." 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times before her final message arrived. "I'm coming home tomorrow to get some things. We need to discuss how to handle this maturely." I stared at the message, then at the security cameras I'd installed throughout the house. Tomorrow would be very interesting indeed. "Handle it maturely," I said aloud to my empty kitchen. "I'll show you mature?" Jennifer Walsh received my package at exactly 9:15 a.m., according to the delivery confirmation I'd paid extra to receive. By 10:30, the first tremors were already rippling through Morrison Packaging Solutions. I knew this because I'd cultivated a source inside the company, not through any elaborate espionage, but through the simple expedient of buying coffee for Big Mike, the security guard who worked the lobby desk. Mike was a retired cop with 30 years on the force, a man who noticed everything and forgot nothing. More importantly, he had no love for corporate executives who treated security staff like furniture. "Place is buzzing like a kicked beehive," Mike told me when I stopped by with his usual large black coffee and a box of donuts for the security desk. HR lady called an emergency meeting with the big shots, lots of closed doors and worried faces. "Sounds serious," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Oh, it's serious all right. Saw your wife heading up to the 15th floor about an hour ago, looking like she was walking to her own execution." I felt a surge of satisfaction. The wheels were turning exactly as I'd hoped. "Well, I'm sure it's nothing that can't be worked out," I said diplomatically. Mike gave me a look that suggested he wasn't fooled by my innocent act. "Sure it is. By the way, thanks for the coffee. Always brightens my day when someone remembers the little people." I left the building with a spring in my step and drove straight to Pete's bar. Murphy's Tavern didn't officially open until 11, but Pete was always there by 9. Prepping for the lunch crowd and handling the business side of running a neighborhood institution. How'd it go? He asked when I walked through the unlocked front door. Like clockwork. HR received the package, and according to my source, they're already in crisis mode. Pete was stocking beer bottles behind the bar, but he paused to give me his full attention. Think they'll actually do anything about it? They have to. Morrison's a public company with strict policies about workplace relationships. Plus, Brad's got a history of this behavior. HR can't ignore it without risking a lawsuit. And Valerie? She's about to learn that actions have consequences. My phone rang, interrupting our conversation. Valerie's name appeared on the screen, but I let it go to voicemail. She called again immediately, then again. The third time, I answered. What? My tone was colder than I'd ever used with her before. Eric, something terrible is happening at work. HR is asking questions about Brad and me, and I think someone reported us to the company. Imagine that. This isn't a joke. My job is on the line here. If they decide we violated company policy, I could be terminated. Sounds like you should have thought about that before you decided to use your boss's desk as furniture. A sharp intake of breath. How can you be so cruel about this? Cruel? I'm not the one who spent 6 weeks lying to my spouse while conducting office romance with a married man. That's cruel, Valerie. This is just consequences. We need to talk face to face. I'm coming home after work to get some things and... No. What do you mean, no? I mean, you're not welcome in my house anymore. You made your choice. Brad's probably got plenty of room at his place. Eric, be reasonable. Half that house is mine. Then call a lawyer. Until then, stay away. I hung up and turned off my phone. Pete was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You okay? He asked. Better than okay. For the first time in months, I feel like I'm in control of my own life. And when she shows up anyway? I smiled. Then she's going to get a very unpleasant surprise. I spent the afternoon at home, fine-tuning my security system and preparing for Valerie's inevitable arrival. The cameras were positioned to capture every angle of our front porch and driveway. The motion sensors were calibrated to detect any movement around the house, and the door alarms were set to sound like air raid sirens if anyone tried to enter without my permission. But the real surprise was waiting in our bedroom. I'd spent 2 hours that morning packing every piece of Valerie's clothing, every personal item, every trace of her presence in our shared space. Everything was neatly folded and organized in garbage bags, not out of spite, but out of efficiency. If she wanted her things, she could have them, all of them, at once. The bags were stacked by the front door like a barricade, 23 bags total representing 8 years of accumulated possessions. Her clothes, her books, her decorative objects, her bathroom supplies, even the coffee mug she'd lied over that morning a lifetime ago. At 6 p.m., my security system chimed with a motion alert. The camera showed Valerie's Honda pulling into our driveway, followed by a car I didn't recognize, a silver sedan with 2 people inside. Backup, apparently. She'd brought reinforcements for what she expected to be a difficult conversation. I watched through the camera as she approached the front door, her movements hesitant, uncertain. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the events of the day. Part of me felt a flicker of sympathy for the woman I'd once loved, but I pushed it aside. Sympathy was a luxury I couldn't afford. She rang the doorbell. I didn't answer. She rang again, then knocked. Eric, I know you're in there. Your car is in the garage. Still no response from me. She tried her key, but the locks had been changed that morning, another stop I'd made while running errands. The sound of her key failing to turn was audible through the door, followed by a frustrated sigh. Eric, open this door right now. We need to talk about this like adults. I activated the intercom system I'd installed as part of the security upgrade. Check the porch. Her voice came through clearly. What? Look down. The camera showed her looking around the porch, confusion evident on her face. Then she saw them, 23 garbage bags lined up against the house like sandbags before a flood. What is this? She asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. Your things. All of them. Everything that belongs to you. Eric, you can't be serious. Completely serious. You wanted to leave our marriage for Brad? Congratulations. You're officially homeless. She tried the door handle again, rattling it in frustration. This is my house, too. You can't lock me out. Watch me. The camera showed her walking back to the silver sedan, gesturing animatedly to whoever was inside. After a brief conversation, 2 people got out. A man and a woman I didn't recognize. The woman looked professional, authoritative. A lawyer, maybe, or someone from HR. They approached the door together, the woman taking the lead. Mr. Mason, my name is Rebecca Torres. I'm a family counselor, and I'm here with Valerie to help mediate the situation. A counselor? Valerie had brought a marriage counselor to what she thought would be a reconciliation conversation. The irony was almost beautiful. "There's nothing to mediate," I said through the intercom. "My wife chose to have an affair with her boss. I chose to end our marriage. Very simple. Mr. Mason, I understand you're hurt and angry, but locking Valerie out of her own home isn't the solution. If you'll just let us in, we can discuss this rationally." The rational discussion happened when I walked into her office and found her with her tongue down another man's throat. Everything after that is just paperwork. Valerie stepped forward, her voice cracking with emotion. "Eric, please. I made a mistake, but we can fix this. 8 years of marriage has to count for something. It counted for everything, right up until you decided it counted for nothing." The counselor tried again. "Mr. Mason, I know this is difficult, but... Lady, I don't know you, and I don't care what credentials you have. This isn't a counseling session. This is a property transfer. Valerie's belongings are on the porch. She's welcome to take them. She's not welcome to come inside." "You're being unreasonable," Valerie said, her voice rising. "I have rights here." "You had rights. You gave them up when you decided to redecorate your office with Brad's anatomy." The counselor looked uncomfortable, clearly out of her depth in a situation that had moved far beyond marriage counseling into something more like a hostage negotiation. "Perhaps we should call the police," she suggested quietly to Valerie. "Go ahead," I said through the intercom. "Call them. I'd love to explain to the officers how my wife has been conducting an affair with her married boss for the past 6 weeks, using company property for personal activities, and is now trying to force her way into a house where she's no longer welcome." That stopped the conversation cold. The three of them stood on my porch, whispering among themselves while I watched from the comfort of my living room. The security cameras captured every word, every expression, every moment of their growing realization that they had no leverage in this situation. Finally, Valerie approached the door one more time. "Eric, I'm sorry. I'm truly, deeply sorry for what I did. But this isn't the way to handle it. We're both adults. We're both intelligent people. We can work through this." "You're right," I said. "We are both adults, which is why you should have acted like one instead of sneaking around behind my back for 6 weeks. It wasn't supposed to happen. It just developed." "Things don't just develop, Valerie. People make choices. You chose Brad over me repeatedly for 6 weeks. Now I'm choosing to live without a cheating wife." The counselor stepped forward again. "Mr. Mason, what would it take for you to let Valerie inside so we can have a proper conversation?" I considered the question seriously. What would it take? "Time travel," I said finally. "A way to go back 6 weeks and prevent my wife from destroying our marriage. Since that's not possible, there's nothing to discuss." They spent another 20 minutes on my porch, trying different approaches, different arguments, different emotional appeals. Nothing worked because there was nothing they could offer that would undo what had been done. Eventually, they began loading the garbage bags into their cars. 23 bags of a life that no longer existed, packed away like evidence from a crime scene. As they prepared to leave, Valerie made one final attempt. "This isn't over, Eric. I'll be back with a lawyer." "Bring whoever you want. Bring the whole law firm. Bring Brad, too, if he's still employed tomorrow. Just don't bring them here." The cars pulled out of my driveway, leaving me alone in the house that was finally completely mine again. I poured myself a whiskey and sat in my living room, reviewing the security footage of the evening's events. Phase 3 was complete. Valerie was officially homeless, professionally compromised, and socially humiliated. But I wasn't done yet, not even close. My phone, when I finally turned it back on, showed 17 new messages. Most were from Valerie, progressing from anger to bargaining to desperation. But one was from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Bradford Shearing. We need to talk." I smiled and poured myself another whiskey. Tomorrow was going to be very interesting indeed. Bradford Shearing called me at 7 a.m. sharp, which suggested he was either very worried or very angry. Possibly both. "We need to meet," he said without preamble when I answered the phone. No greeting, no introduction, just straight to business. The tone of a man accustomed to having his demands met immediately. "Do we?" I kept my voice conversational, almost friendly. I can't imagine what we'd have to discuss. "Don't play games with me, Mason. You know exactly what this is about." "Enlighten me." A pause, the sound of controlled breathing. Brad was clearly struggling to maintain his composure. Someone sent HR a very detailed report about Valerie and me. Someone with access to parking records, security information, and intimate knowledge of our situation. "Sounds like you have a mystery on your hands." "The mystery isn't who sent it. The mystery is what you want to make this go away." I almost laughed. After everything that had happened, Brad thought this was about money. that I was some kind of blackmailer looking for a payout to keep quiet about his office romance. You think I want money? Everyone wants money. Name your price. I don't want your money, Brad. I want something much more valuable. Which is? Your complete and total destruction. The line went quiet for so long I thought he might have hung up. When he finally spoke again, his voice had changed, less commanding, more uncertain. Look, I understand you're upset about Valerie, but... Upset? I interrupted. Brad, upset is when someone cuts you off in traffic. Upset is when your team loses in overtime. What I am is motivated. Motivated to do what? Whatever it takes to make sure you understand the cost of destroying my marriage. Another long pause. This doesn't have to get ugly, Mason. We can handle this like civilized adults. You should have thought about that before you started handling my wife like a stress toy. That's enough. The commanding tone was back, but it sounded forced now, artificial. I'm offering you a reasonable settlement to resolve this matter quietly. If you're not interested in being reasonable, there are other ways to handle problem people. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Brad was suggesting he could make my life difficult if I didn't cooperate. What he didn't understand was that my life was already difficult. He'd seen to that when he decided to seduce my wife. Threats from him were like rain warnings during a hurricane. Other ways? I asked. Like what? You going to have me fired? Audit my taxes? Slash my tires? Please, Brad, tell me more about these other ways. I have connections in this city, people who owe me favors. And I have evidence of your affair with a subordinate employee, documentation of your previous harassment complaints, and a very detailed understanding of Morrison Packaging's corporate policies. Want to compare resources? The line went quiet again. When Brad spoke, his voice was tight, with barely controlled anger. This isn't over. You're absolutely right. It's just getting started. He hung up without another word, leaving me with the satisfaction of knowing that Brad was finally beginning to understand the scope of his problem. I made coffee and checked my phone for updates from Big Mike. The security guard had become an invaluable source of information about the chaos unfolding at Morrison Packaging, and his morning report didn't disappoint. HR brought in outside investigators, Mike texted. Whole executive floor is locked down. Your wife and the suit both got called in for formal interviews. How do they look? Like they're walking to their own funerals. I smiled and poured myself a second cup of coffee. Phase 4 was about to begin, and it required a more public approach than my previous efforts. Morrison Packaging Solutions held their quarterly board meeting every third Thursday of the month in the conference room on the 20th floor. The meetings were open to shareholders, which meant anyone who owned even a single share of Morrison stock could attend and observe the proceedings. I'd purchased 50 shares of Morrison stock 6 months ago as part of a diversified investment strategy that Valerie had mocked as overly conservative. That conservative investment was about to pay dividends she'd never anticipated. The board meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. I arrived at 1:30, dressed in my best suit and carrying a leather portfolio that made me look like every other corporate professional in the building. Big Mike nodded as I passed through the lobby, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes amused. The 20th floor conference room was already half full when I arrived. Board members, senior executives, a handful of shareholders, and several people I didn't recognize who were probably lawyers or consultants. I took a seat in the back row, close enough to observe everything but far enough away to avoid immediate attention. Brad was sitting at the main conference table, looking composed but tense. He wore his authority like expensive cologne, obvious and slightly overwhelming. When his eyes swept the room and landed on me, his composure cracked just enough for me to see the anger underneath. Valerie wasn't present, which wasn't surprising. Operations executives didn't typically attend board meetings unless they were presenting specific reports. The meeting began with standard corporate business, financial reports, operational updates, strategic planning discussions. I listened with half my attention while studying the dynamics of the room. Brad commanded significant respect among the board members, but there were undercurrents of tension that suggested not everyone was completely comfortable with his leadership style. My opportunity came during the open comment period, when shareholders were invited to address the board with questions or concerns. I stood up and raised my hand. Yes? The board chairman, an elderly man named Harrison, acknowledged me with polite disinterest. Thank you, Mr. Harrison. I'm Eric Mason, and I own 50 shares of Morrison stock. I have a concern about corporate governance and executive accountability. Brad's face went pale, but he maintained his professional demeanor. What specific concern? Harrison asked. I've recently become aware of potential violations of company policy regarding relationships between supervisors and subordinates. Given Morrison's public commitment to ethical business practices, I wanted to bring this to the board's attention. The room went completely silent. Harrison glanced at Brad, then back at me. Mr. Mason, if you have specific allegations, those should be directed to our Human Resources Department through appropriate channels. Oh, I've already done that, I said cheerfully. HR received a comprehensive report yesterday morning. I'm simply ensuring that the board is aware of the situation, since it involves a senior executive and could potentially expose the company to liability issues. Brad leaned forward in his chair. Mr. Harrison, this individual is... I'm a concerned shareholder, I interrupted, asking legitimate questions about corporate governance, unless Mr. Shearing would like to address the substance of my concerns directly. The challenge hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Brad could either deny the allegations publicly, which would be perjury if the investigation proved them true, or remain silent and let the board draw their own conclusions. He chose silence, but his jaw was clenched so tight I thought he might crack a tooth. Harrison cleared his throat diplomatically. Mr. Mason, thank you for bringing your concerns to our attention. The board takes all governance issues seriously, and I can assure you that any necessary investigations will be conducted thoroughly. I appreciate that, Mr. Harrison. I look forward to seeing how the company handles this situation. Transparency and accountability are so important for maintaining shareholder confidence. I sat back down, my point made and my message delivered. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur of uncomfortable glances and whispered conversations, but I'd accomplished my goal. Brad's situation was now a matter of public record, discussed in front of the board of directors and documented in the official meeting minutes. When the meeting ended, I made my way toward the elevator, but Brad intercepted me in the hallway. You think you're clever, he said quietly, his voice shaking with rage. I think I'm thorough. This is harassment. I could have you arrested. For attending a public shareholder meeting and asking questions about corporate governance, good luck with that. You're destroying innocent people's lives. I stared at him for a long moment, genuinely amazed by his capacity for self-deception. Innocent people? Brad, you seduced a married woman who worked for you, violated company policy, exposed Morrison to liability issues, and lied to your own wife for 6 weeks. The only innocent person in this situation is me, and you already destroyed my life. I'm just returning the favor. Valerie made her own choices. Yes, she did, and now she gets to live with the consequences, just like you. Brad stepped closer, trying to use his height and physical presence to intimidate me. It might have worked 6 weeks ago, when I was still the trusting husband who believed his wife was working late. But that man was gone, replaced by someone much harder and considerably less forgiving. You have no idea who you're messing with, he said. Actually, I know exactly who I'm messing with. You're a middle-aged corporate executive with a history of harassment, a wife who's about to take you for half your assets, and a board of directors who are now questioning your judgment. You're not nearly as powerful as you think you are. I walked away, leaving him standing in the hallway with his threats and his diminishing authority. The elevator ride down felt like a victory lap. That evening, Pete and I celebrated at Murphy's Tavern with whiskey and the kind of satisfaction that comes from a plan executed flawlessly. So what's next? Pete asked, refilling our glasses. Now we wait for the investigation to conclude and watch Brad's career implode in real time. And Valerie? Valerie's about to discover that being unemployed and homeless makes it very difficult to maintain the lifestyle she's become accustomed to. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. You win. What do you want to make this stop? I showed the message to Pete, who read it with growing amusement. Think it's from Brad? Has to be. Valerie's too proud to surrender, and she doesn't have anything to negotiate with anyway. You going to respond? I considered the question while sipping my whiskey. What did I want? Justice? Revenge? Simple acknowledgement that actions have consequences? Yeah, I said finally, typing my response. I want you to understand that some things can't be fixed with money or connections or corporate power. Some things you just have to live with. I sent the message and turned off my phone. That's it? Pete asked. That's it. The rest is just watching them figure out how to rebuild their lives from the wreckage they created. Sounds like the end of the story. I shook my head and smiled. Pete, this isn't the end. This is just the intermission. I was wrong about it being the intermission. What I thought was the end of Act 2 turned out to be the calm before the real storm, because Brad Shearing was apparently the kind of man who interpreted mercy as weakness and restraint as an invitation to escalate. I learned this at 3 a.m. on a Thursday morning when my security system erupted in a symphony of alarms that sounded like the apocalypse had arrived in my backyard. The motion sensors detected movement around the perimeter of my house. The door alarms were shrieking about attempted entry, and my phone was buzzing with camera notifications showing two figures dressed in dark clothing trying to break into my garage. I rolled out of bed, grabbed the baseball bat I'd started keeping beside my nightstand, and checked the security feeds on my phone. The cameras showed Brad and another man, someone I didn't recognize, built like a bouncer and moving with the confidence of someone accustomed to intimidating people. They'd already forced open the side door to my garage and were working on the door that led into my house. The other man had some kind of electronic device that he was using on the lock, professional equipment, not the improvised tools of casual burglars. I called 911 first, then activated the external speakers I'd installed as part of my security system. "Bradford Shearing," I said, my voice booming across the yard like the voice of an angry god. "You have 30 seconds to get off my property before the police arrive." Both figures froze, then looked around frantically for the source of the voice. The cameras captured Brad's face clearly when he looked up toward the house, a mixture of rage and desperation that suggested a man who'd lost everything and had nothing left to lose. 20 seconds, I announced. Instead of retreating, Brad's companion produced a crowbar and started working on the door with increased urgency. These weren't men who were planning to leave quietly. I made a decision that would define everything that came next. Instead of waiting for the police, I opened my front door and stepped onto the porch with my baseball bat, making myself visible to both the intruders and the security cameras that were recording everything. "That's far enough," I called out. Brad and his friend turned toward me, the crowbar still in the other man's hands. In the harsh glare of my security lights, they looked like actors in a badly lit crime drama, dangerous but somehow diminished by the suburban setting. "You destroyed my life," Brad shouted across the yard. "My marriage, my career, everything I worked for." "You destroyed your own life," I replied. "I just documented the process." "You think you're so smart, hiding behind lawyers and security cameras? Let's see how smart you are, face to face." Brad started walking toward me, his companion following. The crowbar caught the light as they moved, and I realized this had moved far beyond corporate revenge into something much more dangerous. "Stop right there," I said, raising the bat. "The police are already on their way." "The police can't fix what you've done to me. Neither can breaking into my house." Brad was close enough now that I could see his face clearly. The composed corporate executive was gone, replaced by something desperate and unhinged. His suit was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, his red eyes with exhaustion or alcohol or both. "You want to know what you've cost me?" he said. "My wife filed for divorce yesterday. Took the kids, took half my assets, took everything. The board voted to terminate my employment this morning. 20 years with Morrison, gone because of your little revenge fantasy." "Good," I said simply. The word hit him like a physical blow. He stopped walking, swaying slightly on his feet. "Good? You destroyed an innocent man's life? And you think that's good?" "Innocent?" I almost laughed. "Brad, you seduced my wife, violated company policy, lied to your own family, and now you're trying to break into my house with a crowbar. In what universe are you innocent?" Valerie came on to me. She initiated everything. "And you were powerless to resist? A 48-year-old executive was seduced by his subordinate and couldn't help himself?" "You don't understand the pressure I was under. The board expectations, the quarterly targets, the constant stress. So you decided to relieve stress by having an affair with a married employee. Very therapeutic." Brad's companion stepped forward, the crowbar held like a weapon. "Enough talking. Let's finish this." "Finish what?" I asked, genuinely curious. "What exactly do you think you're going to accomplish here?" "We're going to teach you about consequences," the man said. "Real consequences, not your lawyer games and corporate politics." I heard sirens in the distance, growing closer. The police response time in my neighborhood was usually excellent, and tonight was no exception. "You hear that?" I said. "That's the sound of your plan falling apart in real time." Brad looked around frantically, seeming to notice his surroundings for the first time. He was standing in my front yard at 3 a.m, having broken into my garage, accompanied by a man with a crowbar, while police sirens approached and security cameras recorded everything. "This isn't over," he said, but the fight had gone out of his voice. "Yes, it is," I replied. "It's been over since the moment you decided that my wife was more interesting than your marriage or your career or your basic human decency. Everything after that has just been cleanup." The police cars arrived with a symphony of sirens and flashing lights that turned my quiet suburban street into something from a crime drama. 4 officers, all business, all focused on the 2 men standing in my yard with burglary tools. "Those are the individuals who broke into my garage," I told the first officer, pointing at Brad and his companion. "Everything is recorded on my security system." The arrest process was swift and professional. Brad and his friend were handcuffed, read their rights, and loaded into separate police cars while I provided a statement and copies of the security footage. "You'll need to come to the station tomorrow to file a formal complaint," the lead officer told me. "But we have everything we need for the charges." "What charges?" "Breaking and entering, attempted burglary, criminal trespass. Possibly more, depending on what the district attorney decides." I watched the police cars drive away, taking Brad Shearing to a destination he'd never imagined when he started his affair with my wife. From corporate executive to criminal defendant in less than 2 months, a spectacular fall that he'd engineered entirely through his own choices. The next morning brought a phone call from Valerie, her first direct contact since the night I'd locked her out of the house. "Eric, I heard about what happened with Brad. Are you okay?" Her voice sounded different, smaller, uncertain, stripped of the confidence she'd worn like armor during our marriage. "I'm fine. Your boyfriend, on the other hand, is facing felony charges." "He's not my boyfriend anymore. He hasn't been for weeks." "Since he lost his job, you mean?" A long pause. "Since I realized what kind of man he really was." "Took you long enough." "Eric, I know I have no right to ask this, but I need help. I lost my job when the investigation concluded, and I can't find anywhere to rent without references or employment history. I'm staying at a motel, but I can't afford it much longer." I felt a flicker of the sympathy I'd suppressed for months, but it was overwhelmed by the memory of everything she'd put me through. "That sounds like a problem you should discuss with your lawyer." "I don't have a lawyer anymore. I can't afford one." "Then I guess you're learning about consequences the hard way." "Please, Eric, I'm not asking you to take me back or forgive me. I just need somewhere to stay until I can get back on my feet." "You had somewhere to stay. You gave it up for Brad." "I made a terrible mistake. I know that now. But I'm still the woman you married, the woman you loved for 8 years. "No," I said quietly. "That woman wouldn't have spent 6 weeks lying to my face while she conducted an affair with her boss. That woman wouldn't have brought a marriage counselor to manipulate me into forgiveness. That woman had integrity." "People make mistakes, Eric. Even good people." "Good people make mistakes. Selfish people make choices. You made choices, Valerie. Now you get to live with them." I hung up and turned off my phone. 3 days later, I received a call from Detective Morrison, the officer handling Brad's case. "Mr. Mason, I wanted to update you on the charges against Bradford Shearing and his associate." "What's the status?" "Shearing pled guilty to attempted burglary and criminal trespass in exchange for a reduced sentence. He'll serve 6 months in county jail and pay restitution for the damage to your property." "And his friend?" "Marcus Webb. He's got a record, so he's looking at more serious time. But that's not really your concern." 6 months in jail for a man who'd been earning $350,000 a year just 2 months ago. The fall from grace was complete and irreversible. That evening, I sat on my front porch with a beer, watching the sunset over the neighborhood where I'd lived for 8 years. The house felt different now, not empty, but peaceful, like a weight had been lifted that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. My phone buzzed with a text message from Pete. "Saw the news about Brad's sentencing. How do you feel?" I considered the question while finishing my beer. How did I feel? "Like justice," I typed back. "Justice or revenge." "What's the difference?" "Good point. Drinks tonight?" "Definitely." I locked up the house and headed for Murphy's Tavern, where Pete was waiting with whiskey and the kind of satisfaction that comes from seeing a plan executed perfectly from beginning to end. "So, what's next?" he asked as we settled into our usual booth. "Next, I start over. New life, new possibilities, no cheating wife or corporate executives trying to break into my garage." Sounds peaceful. Peaceful sounds pretty good right now? We drank to new beginnings and closed chapters, to justice served and lessons learned. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, promising rain that would wash the streets clean and leave everything fresh for tomorrow. I raised my glass one final time. "Next time someone wants to work late," I said, "I'll pack them a snack." Pete laughed, and we drank to that too. The storm broke just as we were leaving the bar, but I didn't mind getting wet. After everything I'd been through, a little rain felt like baptism, washing away the past and preparing me for whatever came next. And for the first time in months, I was looking forward to finding out what that would be.